Hello and welcome to In the Director's Chair on Guardian.co.uk. I'm Jason Solomons and I'm delighted to say that my guest on this edition of the show is none other than the Cockney auteur, Nick Love, author of films such as The Business, The Football Factory, Goodbye Charlie Bright and his latest film, The Firm, which sees him retreading old football grounds with the three Fs: football violence, fashion and funk.
You've got to get up a little bit early if you want to catch me out, son. You're out your league.
Don't you think all this is getting a bit out of hand?
This is payback time.
Just drop a man, stop playing the big man.
You don't know what they're like, mate.
I know one thing. I want my mate back.
Nick, thank you for coming in the director's chair into the Guardian studios. Lovely to have you with us. I'm decked out in got my feelers on, I've got my Forest Hills on. I thought the details are right, because that's what I like about all of your films, that the details are always bang on.
I think that if you're going to tell a story about a particular time in a particular place, you've got to be very specific about it. And I think that the clothes are, I like clothes, and we wouldn't think it now, but I mean, I like clothes, I like fashion, and so I think that's always reflected in my film.
Go into one of your films, and it is a distinctive Nick Love film, and it seemed to come quite quickly that you established a certain style and voice that was about your film.
Well, I have a particular sense of humour which permeates most of my films. Not necessarily Outlaw, that wasn't exactly a laugh fest, but
there's it's male banter, I'd say, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it is. The humour for me is very rarely in gags. It's more about dialogue and people saying extreme and outrageous things as part of their daily vernacular.
2 beers, please. I suppose sucking me cock's out of the question.
I suppose it is seen as my old man sitting over there, and he's a big cunt.
What I see myself as a filmmaker having is a bit of heart. People matter to me, and so that's a theme in the film. Comedy. I enjoy life. I'm not a kind of downbeat person. Do you know what I mean? And I find life exciting, and I find filmmaking exciting, and I'm very exhilarated by being a filmmaker. And so those are the things that actually come out of my films. Do you know what I mean? As sort of very subtle things.
But it's interesting that you mentioned how Clarke was influential on your work, and social realism, British social realism, which your films sort of belong to. Although what characterises those works, I think in general, people would say is a kind of slight sort of grimness, a dourness. You're sort of apart from...
The most flattering thing that anyone in the press has ever called me was a hybrid with Alan Clarke and Scorsese, a young Scorsese.
Well, that's not bad, is it?
But not in the sense that my films are as good as theirs, but more in the sense that when you watch one of my films, you can sense there's social realism. To me, it's essentially about making films about a world that is familiar to us rather than aliens and monsters. Not just being a filmmaker, but being a film fanatic. Your influences are always changing. My first influences were Clarke, Loach, Anderson. They were all of a really good tradition. And then I left that behind. I think when I went to film school in the mid-90s, I got into Michael Mann and got into Scorsese in a big way, and looked for much more stylish filmmakers. And then I got into I got into direct cinema, Frederick Wiseman, the Maysville brothers, and then I was into Melville, Jean-Pierre Melville. There were so many different films you watch.
I was into them coming.
Yeah, I was into Jean Vigo for it. He only made 2 films, Zero de Conduit and L'Atalante, before he died.
He's good to be an expert on, isn't he?
Well, that's right. I mean, you could do a good précis on 2 films, and so there's so much that you kind of. But ironically, I'm now back at Clarke. I'm now looking at Clarke's work again because it's just brilliant.
And a lot of the filmmakers we mentioned there sort of attempted social realism in a sort of it's good for you kind of way. They were kind of, quite sort of educated filmmakers who would be stepping down to kind of work in the lower classes. It strikes me that you're one of the filmmakers who actually comes from the milieux you're depicting. And do you think that that's what gives you a sort of difference?
I was brought up by my mum on the edge of an enormous council estate, big single estate in South London. And so when I was 5, as essentially... I mean, I don't know what influence you get at the age of 5, but from the age of 5 onwards, it was purely working class influences. And so, I don't even know what a mockney is particularly, but I think I'm probably more than just a mockney because of the fact I did spend 15 years living in that world, and so I did get the smell of it, you know.
You want to start eating people in the mouth instead of the back of the fucking head? What's the matter with you?
It's just as well I did, or you'd be in hospital, you cunt.
No one loved Chelsea more than me and Rod. We grew up on football terraces together with me old man. He knew the score. First bit of advice he gave me was...
You know what to do if someone tries to clump you, don't you, son?
Kick him in the fucking bollocks, Dad.
Me granddad, old Bill Farrell, drove us to drink with his stories about the war and how he'd fought to put the great into Britain. He said fighting at football was nothing compared to combat with the Germans.
We'll fight them on the beaches, we'll fight them on the shore.
Although he went on, he was right. We're an island race. It's what we do best. It's not about colour or race, it's just a buzz of being in the front line. Truth is, I just love to fight. There's nothing wrong with me, unlike Billy Bright, whose dad had a funny way of setting a good example for his son.
Right, that's it. I'll fight every one of you before you move in next door to us. Come on, son, help us.
With parents like that, he was never going to end up in Greenpeace.
And the music as well has always been key to getting the right track from the right era. Well, I think that it conjures up the atmosphere brilliantly in The Firm. It is, let's be honest, it's a remake, very loose remake, of Alan Clark's brilliant TV film, The Firm, which was the first film really about football violence. There's a few people out there I know are sort of saying, how can you remake that? It's A, it wasn't that long ago, and B, it's sacrosanct, it's Alan Clark. But you're an Alan Clark fan, surely?
Well, I'm a massive Alan Clark fan, first and foremost. And you know, Alan Clark was, I mean, pretty much solely the reason I got into making films. I saw the original Firm when it was broadcast in 1989. It had a life-changing effect on me, I promise you. You know, and I think, I mean, I can remember it was the first film that I'd ever seen that really, really spoke to me beyond just being a sort of bit of entertainment for an hour or so. And you know, it was the first film where the vernacular was something I really understood. It was seen as like this one-off kind of amazing piece of work. And I remember watching the film for the second time and thinking, you know, I remember when I was going to football, the gangs were much bigger than they were in The Firm. And the clothes were very different from those in Clark's film. And so, you know, that's not to say that I wanted to go and make it better, because there's no way you can make a better film than that. The only thing you could possibly do is make a different film than that.
Is there a sense that you sort of, well, I've done the Football Factory, I've sort of done the business, and this is an amalgam of the two, and a Goodbye Charlie Bright?
Yeah, I think that we are all... I mean, no one's ever made the perfect film. You know, you always look back at your films and sort of think, Jesus Christ, you know, that's ropey or whatever. And I'm certainly cutting my teeth. You know, I'm 39. I've been fortunate enough to make 5 films now. And when I look back at Charlie Bright, I see a film with a lot of heart, but it's very clunky storytelling. And I feel that The Firm is the first film I've made where I understand the language of visual storytelling, where it's a sort of, the idea is that the juxtaposition is just sort of seamlessly kind of put together.
Probably taken quite a lot of punches as a British director over the 5 films that you've made.
You know, I think that there is a history in England that if you make a film which is media friendly, they quite often don't perform. And if you make a film that is multiplex friendly, they quite often are not very well celebrated by the media. And when I sat down and thought about making The Firm, the first thing I thought was, oh my God, I will get crucified.
By whom? By the critics?
Yeah. Now, actually, that hasn't been the case thus far. You know, and people that have derided my films in the past have actually said, against all the odds, and my God, this was a cynical read when we said come to, you know, the press junket thing for this was like, oh dear, he's making another film about football violence, and he's taken Alan Clark's work. Everything stacked against you, and I think that probably works in my favour because they're expecting, you know, so little. You know, the broadsheets and generally the media on the kind of weekend of release, I still think they'll struggle with it because it is ultimately a film and it does have football violence as a backdrop.
I see you Millwall boys are away up north today. Might be passing through King's Cross round about the same time as you. Fancy a meet?
Yeah, what's the matter, mate? You sound a bit agged. You still gutted we keep catching you out?
You couldn't catch a cold, you prick. Do you fancy it or not?
Yeah, well, you wouldn't think so.
There's a pub behind the station, head for that. Oh, and don't bring the old bill with you. Grass.
Yeah, we'll be there. Shithead.
And watch your back. Because I'm going to slit you open like an envelope.
Yeah, you don't stand up.
But it's very much a backdrop. I mean, much of the violence doesn't actually happen. It's threatened. It's smelt, as you say earlier.
One thing for me was to really make the fights seem. I mean, of course, they're not going to seem authentic to the Peter Bradshaw, particularly because he's not been at them, I'm sure, very often.
He's trying to get into a Godard screening in Cannes. It was murder, I tell you.
But to people that had been to football, not necessarily football violence, people that have been to football, and there are millions and millions of us that go to football.
For the atmosphere, that's why we don't see it on telly.
Correct, because it's highly charged, etc. You know, that kind of mass sprawling crowd, the way that violence is suddenly instantaneous and unexpected, and suddenly it comes out of nowhere, and there's a feeling of tension, and you don't see what's happening. For us, me and the technical consultant Lee on the film, it was all about making it feel like that. It's about tribal rights, and it's, you know, as I've said, it's really about my experience, which is why I've told the story so acutely from another protagonist's point of view. My experience of getting caught up with older boys and thinking much more of them than I should have done, and idolising the wrong people. You know, ultimately the boys I idolised at football or just around the flats or whatever, they were not good role models. They were wrong, you know, even though they were nice guys. Like Bex is in my firm, he's got plenty of charisma, he's funny, he's a good dancer, you know, he's got the gift of the gab, but he is ultimately a man who, at heart, likes violence.
You must have been daunted taking on Alan Clark's firm, but it must have been daunting for Paul Anderson, an actor I didn't know before, taking on Gary Oldman.
No, the thing about the thing about Paul Anderson is that you know, he's a ticket tout. He's not an actor,
right?
And he's now, you know, hopefully going to be an actor. But he'd done a couple of plays because he got interested in acting prior to the firm, but he hadn't been in front of a camera, and so, you know, I'd met with much more established actors. You know, there's some good London actors around that could have played Bex. And they all had that fear of Gary Oldman's role, you know, and how kind of potent it was. But Paul Anderson, not in an arrogant way, because he hasn't got that kind of arrogant streak, although he has on screen, you know. But as a human being, he doesn't have that arrogant streak. But he didn't give a shit. He didn't care. He just said, yeah, whatever.
None of you got any tickets, have you? No. And you don't intend to buy any, do you?
Here, mate. Might as well sit down and have a drink with us. Come on.
Come on, mate. Go on. I'll fuck with
I enjoyed very much The Business. I enjoyed Goodbye Charlie Bright as well, which I thought was a really delightful little first film, and The Football Factory as well for the atmospheres. I thought, and Outlaw, which kind of put you in a different territory, was a bit dangerous, but again, I thought this filmmaking craft there was something to watch. But The Firm, I definitely think, is the best thing you've done, which is why I'm delighted to have you in the director's chair. And I know you've just promised to make 20 more. I hope we'll have you back here again if we're both still here doing it. Will it be your last football film, though?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I mean, you know, the decision to go back and revisit that culture, again, it's like if you know the details, you know the specifics of that culture, you'll see it's such a different film from The Football Factory. Such a different film. And The Football Factory, I love the film in lots of ways. But it's a very, very different film. The tone, the style, the details, the era, the humour, everything is different about it. But to people that don't know the difference, they'll see it as another football film. And so, you know, I wouldn't go back and revisit it again.
Absolutely. Well, I'm delighted to don my old gear as well. It gives me an excuse to get out of the suit.
I think you look very fetching. You look like a fruit pastel.
Thank you very much indeed. You're the first person that has called me that, and congratulations on that. I think that's an Oscar for you. Nick Love, brilliant to have you in the director's chair. Congratulations on The Firm.